Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe somebody should be responsible for their consumption, like their economic choices.
Yeah, I think that from the perspective of a consumer, there is a degree of abstraction associated with purchasing a product that from a virtue ethicist perspective sort of negates the moral ungood, the moral wrong that we've committed. Because we buy shit all the time that's made, the silicon farmed by slaves in Africa, plastic made in factory farms that pollute the earth, like that sort of thing. But we don't impugn each other for it.
Okay, so if you were to, there's pedophiles, right, who buy child pornography.
Mhm.
Would you say they should not be held responsible for doing that?
Yes.
Really? Even though they're directly supporting child rape?
Yeah.
Now, I thought I was over and done with talking about Vaush. I've done 2 response videos to him, and at this point, I don't watch any of his content anymore. YouTube keeps recommending it, I keep ignoring it. However, it's been brought to my attention that he has said some rather batshit insane stuff in one recent video he did in a debate about, of all things, veganism. It's apparently the case that Vaush believes that watching CP is not immoral. In fact, according to him, it's even potentially virtuous to do so.
That from a virtue ethicist perspective,
Vaush believes there is nothing unethical about CP. Unfortunately, this time I'm going to have to disagree with him, yet again, because I find watching CP, or people who watch CP, to be utterly morally reprehensible. They are criminals, and they should be imprisoned for doing what they're doing. To me, the immorality of watching CP should be obvious, but let me lay it out for you. The biggest problem with it is it's absolutely disgusting. You are a disgusting person if you watch CP. You are degrading yourself every time you do it, and you're degrading whoever's depicted in the video or image. To go further and actually buy CP from someone is to go and create a black market, a marketplace where something like this can be sold as a commodity for profit. You thus contribute to the demand for CP. These marketplaces cause enormous harm to children who are victimized, raped, subject to all sorts of degradations that no children should ever have to go through. All because of people who watch CP and enjoy it. These children are often helpless and victimized by their own deranged parents. The victims in these cases are vulnerable children who are dependent on adults to take care of them. Instead, they're exploited, degraded, treated as objects, and betrayed by the group of people who should be, if anything, role models to them, who should be taking care of them. If you're the type of person who watches CP, you're also tremendously disloyal. It's against the law. You're breaking the rules that we're all required to follow. If you're fortunate enough to live in some place like the United States, you're the citizen of a republic, and it's time to act like one. Watching CP is something that I would expect a barbarian to do, not someone who's an educated citizen of a republic. If you watch CP, you are subverting our laws, you're subverting our culture, and you're acting immorally and unethically. It's beyond the pale for Vaush to declare that this sort of conduct is ethical, and he even goes further than that. According to Vaush, his beliefs about CP are informed by his virtue ethics.
Virtue ethicist perspective.
Now, I myself am someone who believes wholeheartedly in virtue ethics. I think it's the only branch of ethics that makes any sense at all. But let me ask you a simple question. Someone who watches CP, are they acting virtuously, or are they acting according to a vice? No person with even a basic understanding of virtue ethics would ever describe watching CP as a virtue. It's clearly a disgusting vice that someone would engage in. But I'm sure this is just an aberration, right? Vaush didn't say anything else that was just entirely patently insane during this debate, did he?
So if in a hypothetical reality where we were using black people as meat, what would you say then?
We always gotta get so grim.
No. Let's cover that.
Like if it was the same thing, like with animals.
Yeah,
but
if
instead it's black people?
if we had fields of black people, and once they reached a certain age, once they were nice and big and meaty, we killed and ate them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd still
Would you
buy
be in
that fucking.
favor of that?
I'd still buy that dark meat from the supermarket. Yeah, it's the exact same thing.
What? So it's not just ethical to watch CP, according to Vaush, it's also ethical to cannibalize black people, apparently? Are you fucking kidding me? In the first response video I did with Vaush, the one where he's debating someone who has a conservative view on the border wall, where this person keeps bringing up the fact that women and children are trafficked for labor and sex across the US-Mexican border, and how this is a big problem that he's legitimately concerned with, I was kind of shocked at how indifferent Vaush came across to this whole thing.
And it's going to cut back on sex trafficking that's happening. There's an open air slave market down on the southern border. It's crazy. And so my heart bleeds for those women that go to those unknown faiths. I mean, genuinely, my heart truly.
Yeah, we don't need to like virtue
ethicist perspective
or anything. It's okay. Listen. Are you white?
He could not give two shits about any of these people who were trafficked in that video. Instead, he keeps criticizing the guy he's debating with for even bringing this up, and repeatedly talks about how the United States needs to tolerate this happening so that it can maximize the amount of economic growth that it could possibly achieve. It definitely made me scratch my head as to why someone who's a self-professed far leftist would have so little compassion for human beings at the expense of corporate profits. But given that Vaush also thinks that it's virtuous to watch CP and engage in cannibalism, now I kind of understand. Vaush is just completely fucking insane. So why is Vaush even saying this insane shit? Well, in this debate that he's having, Vaush takes the position that basically consumers should never be blamed, should never be held to be unethical for consuming things, even if those things were provided through unsavory methods. And his reasoning based on this is the fact that a lot of US consumer products are manufactured in third world countries that have sketchy protections for workers. Vaush argues the following. We buy these consumer products like computers that have potentially rare earth minerals that come from third world countries. In those third world countries, there's all sorts of social problems where perhaps workers are exploited, enslaved, perhaps there's some ethnic cleansing going on, and that's involved in the harvesting of these materials. And because of this, all consumers are equally guilty of consuming things that contribute to social problems. And since he doesn't believe that all consumers should be blamed for this, then as a matter of principle, it doesn't make any sense to blame people who consume things like CP or even human flesh. Now here's why that argument is completely and utterly absurd. Now I agree, I don't like how I can go to the store and try and buy some consumer good like a pair of jeans or something like that, and now suddenly I'm tangentially involved in some sort of genocide going on in Africa that I don't even know about. That's why I'm a localist. It's why I oppose globalism. I would like to see sustainable local communities that aren't reliant on doing business with these third world countries that treat their citizens terribly. The United States and other first world countries should refuse to trade with these other countries until they raise the standards of living for their workers. That would give them an incentive to improve themselves. I think most people agree with me. They don't want to buy stuff that's involved in all of this bullshit. But here's the thing. Any given consumer product that I buy has only maybe a small chance of being involved in some incident where an atrocity happened. I, as well as anyone else, has no way of pinpointing what items at the store are involved in some sort of serious workers' rights abuse. And I need to consume things in order to live. I can't simply refuse to buy anything because there's always a risk that this consumer product that I purchased was involved in some third world incident. But that's way different than someone who watches CP. Someone who goes out and watches CP, who seeks it out, who tries to obtain that material, knows for 100% that they're watching an exploited child. Also, unlike consumers who generally have to consume things in order to live lives in the United States, nobody is obligated to or has to look at CP. It's not a requirement. People who watch CP are people who like CP. People who like to watch that sort of thing. People who are disgusting. Vaush's argument makes absolutely no sense. Since Vaush brought it up, let's talk a little bit about virtue ethics. My conception of virtue ethics is very much in line with what Aristotle talked about in his writings on the subject. Aristotle believed that every object, person, thing had a purpose called a telos. So for example, if you had a fork, its telos would be to be a fork. It achieved its purpose if it was a good fork, if you could use it to fork your food. Alternatively, if you had something like a knife that wasn't sharp enough to cut anything, well, its telos would be unfulfilled. Like Aristotle, I believe that human beings have a telos. I believe that telos is to live virtuous lives, preferably free of vice to the fullest extent possible, and that by pursuing virtue, human beings can eventually achieve a sort of self-actualization, which is a much deeper feeling of satisfaction in their life than they would get from engaging in hedonistic activities like sex or drug use. My belief in the truth of virtue ethics has only been strengthened by the research that I've read about that Jonathan Haidt conducted. Jonathan Haidt is a college professor who focused his studies on moral reasoning and the psychology of moral beliefs. According to Jonathan Haidt, human beings are different than a lot of animals in that we didn't just evolve as individuals, we evolved as groups. This concept is called group selection. The significance of this is that, unlike most animals, human beings are not entirely selfish, individualist creatures. The reason for that is that groups of people who were entirely selfish, individualist would end up getting conquered by groups that were more cohesive. And through this group selection, human beings developed a certain set of moral foundations. Jonathan Haidt comes up with 6 of them, which includes domination versus liberty, care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, authority versus subversion, loyalty versus disloyalty, and sanctity versus disgust. Human beings gained these moral values after thousands of years of evolution. And it's through these moral foundations that we've gained through evolution that we become satisfied with ourselves, other people, our country, etc., through virtuous behaviors that reinforce these moral values. Now, some people might try and criticize my viewpoint by saying that it's an appeal to nature. It's the naturalistic fallacy. And I disagree with that because, once again, I agree with Aristotle that human beings have a telos. We have a purpose. There's something that makes a human being into a good human being. And therefore, a human being ought to follow that. They ought to pursue their purpose in hopes of achieving self-actualization, which is a recognized concept in psychology. With that understanding, someone who watches CP is clearly not acting virtuously. They're doing something that's disgusting. They're doing something that's disloyal to their community. They're subverting the law. And they're causing harm to poor children by contributing to a marketplace that exploits them. Watching CP is clearly and without a doubt a vice. And it's shameful for Vaush to defend people who watch this sort of filth. The overall reason that Vaush makes this argument is so that he can try and win this debate with this vegan guy. You see, Vaush agrees with this guy, his name is Vegan Gains, that basically the process of extracting meat from domestic animals is very cruel and causes suffering. And since he concedes all of those premises, he needs to reconcile this with the fact that despite having these beliefs, he selfishly eats meats and animal products. And so he comes up with this bullshit CP comparison as a way of justifying his consumerism, despite the fact that he thinks that the meat that he eats, as well as the other animal products he consumes, is obtained through a really horrific and unethical method. Now, Vegan Gains, and I think correctly, points out the hypocrisy of Vaush's position. People need to consume consumer goods generally in order to survive, but there's no particularly good reason that Vaush needs to consume meat or other animal products other than he simply likes consuming those products. There's nothing that would really stand in his way from stopping from doing so. Vaush's whole argument during this debate is a giant whataboutism. He keeps saying, well, what about people who drive SUVs? Aren't they burning more gas? What about this person doing this? Etc., etc. Vaush can't properly debate Vegan Gains because he's conceded all of his premises. All that Vaush can do is try and distract from the debate with his stupid whataboutism arguments that lead him to take completely absurd positions like that it's ethical and virtuous to watch CP or that it's ethical to cannibalize other people. Now, I myself am not a vegan, and I can make an argument based off virtue ethics as to why it's not unethical to eat meat. In fact, I've made this argument before. A year or so ago, Naked Ape did a debate with a vegan where he did extremely poorly. He looked like a complete buffoon in the debate. And so I posted a response video posting what I thought was a proper response to the type of argument that the vegan was making. It was not the same guy, by the way. It wasn't Vegan Gains who Naked Ape was debating. I can't say whether or not Naked Ape ever saw that video that I made, but I will tell you that not too long after I posted it, Naked Ape deleted that debate off of his Weekend Chimp Out channel. In fact, he no longer makes content anymore. Now, in that video, I was pretty condescending. I was almost kind of trying to imitate Naked Ape's condescending style. So let me give a more serious argument in this video. It's virtuous to eat meat because meat is part of a human tradition. For thousands of years, your ancestors have likely consumed meat. In fact, you show loyalty every time you eat meat to all of your fellow Americans who also eat meat. Or if you're in another country, whatever country you're in, assuming it's a meat-eating country. Eating meat respects the authority of the traditions of your culture, as well as the authority of the government, which regulates and authorizes the consumption of meat. Our culture and government have put certain practices into effect to ensure that meat meets a certain standard of quality, that it avoids getting contaminated with anything that would make you sick. There's also rules and regulations on how animals can be kept and how they can be euthanized before meat is harvested off their body. I talked earlier about how humans have a telos. Well, livestock animals also have a telos, and that telos is to be livestock, to grow up and then be harvested for meat. They gain this telos by utilizing, whether they wanted to or not, an evolutionary strategy of cooperating with human beings. Livestock animals could not survive in the wild today. If you release them from their captivity, they would no longer be fulfilling their telos. While I agree that there's probably some suffering that these animals go through, as a result of them being livestock. And while I agree that's not a good thing, I think in balance, it is virtuous and ethical to consume meat. And therefore, I'm not ashamed to be a meat eater. I believe this is a proper virtue ethics argument as to why it's acceptable to eat meat. It's what Vaush should have said instead of defending people who watch CP and defending human cannibalism. Anyways, that's all I have to say on this subject. If you like this video and you're not already subscribed, please subscribe.